They saw a black woman in first class and decided she didn't belong. Within minutes, security was at her seat. Passengers stared. Phones hovered. Whispers spread faster than the truth. She wasn't loud. She wasn't disruptive. She had a valid ticket, a confirmed seat, and a schedule packed with meetings that could move markets. None of that seemed to matter. What they saw was all they needed. She was escorted off the plane in front of everyone, her dignity questioned, her success invisible. The airline thought they were removing a problem. They had no idea they were humiliating a woman whose signature controlled billions of dollars in investments, billions tied directly to their future. By the time the plane doors closed, the damage was already done. But what happened after that quiet walk through the terminal didn't just change one flight, it shook an entire corporation. The question is, when you judge someone by what you think they are, what does it cost when you're wrong? For years, she had moved through boardrooms where decisions reshaped industries. Her name carried weight in financial circles. As a self-made CEO and lead investment partner at a powerful venture firm, she oversaw billions in assets, funding startups, stabilizing corporations, and advising executives who once underestimated her. She had earned everything the hard way: degrees from elite universities, sleepless nights building companies, and a reputation for precision that made even seasoned investors listen twice. Flying first class wasn't a luxury to her. It was efficiency. Tight schedules. Back-to-back meetings. Cities blending together in a rhythm of departures and arrivals. She preferred quiet flights, time to review proposals, finalize numbers, prepare for the next negotiation. That morning was no different. She arrived early, dressed sharply but simply, her laptop filled with documents tied to a major funding decision, one that involved several transportation and travel companies, including a prominent airline struggling to maintain investor confidence. To most passengers, she looked like just another traveler. But to the markets, she was leverage. As she settled into her seat and fastened her belt, she had no idea that before the plane even reached cruising altitude, her identity would be questioned. Not her credentials. Not her ticket. Her right to be there. The first sign was subtle. A flight attendant paused beside her seat longer than necessary. A tight smile. A second glance at her boarding pass. Then a quiet walk toward the front of the plane. At first, she barely noticed. She was reviewing a funding brief, numbers reflecting a potential multi-billion-dollar allocation scheduled for approval within days. Then two security officers stepped onto the aircraft. They didn't scan the cabin. They walked directly to her. Conversations around her faded into whispers. The air shifted. One officer asked for her ticket. She handed it over calmly. First class. Seat confirmed. Name matching her ID. Everything in order. Still, they didn't leave. Instead, more questions. Was she in the correct seat? Had she been upgraded properly? Could she step into the aisle for a moment? The words were polite. The implication was not. Heat rose to her face, but her voice remained steady. She explained she had boarded like everyone else. That she had meetings waiting. That there must be some mistake. Passengers began recording. The officers exchanged glances. A supervisor was called. The delay stretched. Each passing second felt heavier than the last. The captain announced a brief hold before departure. Eyes shifted toward her, some curious, some sympathetic, some quietly judgmental. She could feel it. The assumption. A woman like her doesn't sit here. When she refused to voluntarily leave a seat she paid for, the tone changed. Firm. Procedural. Final. If she did not comply, she would be escorted off. Escorted. The word echoed. She stood on her own. Not because she agreed, but because she understood escalation rarely favors people who look like her in moments like this. Her laptop remained open on the armrest, displaying financial projections tied to transportation investments, including a significant position in this very airline's recovery plan. No one bothered to ask who she was. No one asked what she did. As she walked down the aisle, the silence felt louder than shouting. A few passengers lowered their phones. Others leaned away as if controversy were contagious. The humiliation wasn't just removal, it was public doubt. A quiet stripping of status. At the aircraft door, she turned slightly, scanning the cabin that had just rejected her presence. Then she stepped off. Inside the terminal, security questioned her again. No clear accusation. No rule violation cited. Just standard procedure and concerns raised. Concerns by whom? No answer. Minutes later, she stood alone near the gate window, watching the aircraft still grounded because of the disruption they had caused. Her phone buzzed. An email notification. The subject line referenced the airline's funding review scheduled for that afternoon. A $5 billion capital extension her firm had been leading, money the airline desperately needed to stabilize after consecutive quarterly losses. Her thumb hovered over the screen. On the other side of the glass, the crew prepared for departure. They thought the incident was over. They thought removing her solved the problem. They had no idea they had just shifted the balance of power, and that before the plane even reached cruising altitude, a decision would be made that could send their stock into freefall. The terminal was quieter now, but inside her, something had shifted. She stood tall, humiliation still burning beneath her calm expression, as the airline supervisor repeated the same hollow phrases. Protocol. Miscommunication. We apologize for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. On the other side of the glass, the aircraft door finally closed. The plane that removed her was preparing for takeoff, without the passenger they decided didn't belong. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an email. It was her board. They were waiting on her final approval to release the $5 billion capital infusion, funding that would stabilize this airline's debt, boost investor confidence, and likely save thousands of jobs. Her firm had negotiated the terms for months. Executives from this very company had shaken her hand in private conference rooms, thanking her for believing in their recovery. And hours later, their staff had questioned her right to sit in first class. She opened the financial dashboard. The numbers were real. The leverage was real. And so was the disrespect. For a moment, the noise around her faded. No passengers. No supervisors. Just a decision. Was she overreacting? Was this just one employee's bias? Or was this the same quiet assumption that follows power when it comes in the wrong skin? Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened screen. They didn't see a CEO. They saw a problem. Her thumb moved. One message to her board: suspend the funding review. Effective immediately. Within minutes, notifications began rippling across executive channels. Emergency calls. Confusion. Panic building in offices miles away from this gate. The supervisor's phone rang. And suddenly the tone shifted. The woman they escorted off the plane was no longer an inconvenience. She was the reason their future was now uncertain. By the end of the day, the airline's executives were no longer speaking through gate supervisors. They were calling her directly. Apologies came quickly. Carefully worded statements. Promises of internal investigations. Mandatory bias training. Public relations teams scrambling to contain a story that was already leaking beyond the terminal walls. Stock analysts began asking questions. Investors grew uneasy. The suspended $5 billion wasn't just money, it was oxygen. She listened. Calm. Measured. Unshaken on the surface. But the damage wasn't financial. It was human. No press release could erase the walk down that aisle. No corporate memo could undo the weight of strangers staring as if she were trespassing in a space she had earned many times over. She had built companies from nothing. Negotiated deals across continents. Sat across from presidents and billionaires. And still, in a single moment, none of that protected her from being reduced to an assumption. Eventually, after public accountability measures were agreed upon and leadership changes initiated, Her firm reinstated negotiations under stricter conditions. Not as revenge, as leverage for reform. The airline survived. But so did the lesson. Because this was never just about one flight. It was about how quickly power is questioned when it wears black skin. How easily dignity is stripped before identity is verified. How often excellence must prove itself twice. She returned to the skies weeks later. Head high. Ticket in hand. Unapologetic. Not because the world had changed overnight, but because backing down would mean accepting the lie. The question is, how many qualified, brilliant, unstoppable people are still being asked to step aside simply because of how they look? And what would happen if every one of them decided not to?